behind. When all the world seems in tune, and love goes on softly home. So don't be sighing or crying, dear, if winter
All right, welcome to another Lawyers, Guns, and Money podcast. We're going to be talking about the first episode of the 4th season of Game of Thrones. I'm Scott R. Kaufman. This is my
I'm Steve Apple.
Yes. And so you probably just watched the episode last night, and you're wondering how you got this great commentary so quickly. It's because we're awesome. And we're just going to jump right in because there's quite a bit to talk about with this episode, and I think I'll let Stephen, as is customary, start us off.
Sure. So, it's interesting. We start with a pre-credit sequence, which I think is the only time since the first season. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, it is.
And, it's nicely sort of symbolic, as you will, of a passing of eras. That the Stark House Sword, and if you didn't notice that's what it is, is being literally destroyed and remade into something very different by mirror playing. And then we sort of go into the credits. We get the Dreadfort and Marine for the first time. The Dreadfort looks appropriately gruesome. All the towers look like little meat tenderizer hammers. Did you notice that?
I did not notice the meat tenderizers, but I did notice that we had quite a few additions to the opening credits. But before we get to the credits, we should focus a little more on that opening sequence, because there's so much terribleness there. It's a sword that we know, an important one, literally being melted down, going to be given to the, well, we know who's going to be, who's going to get the sword, and their relationship to its owners, and also, just in case you didn't quite put it all together, they go the extra mile and here's
the wolf pelt into the
a wolf pelt, and we're just going to throw that right on top.
It's kind of interesting because
I think it's a shitty sword.
Well, it starts.
Wait, there's some hair in my sword.
No. Different fire.
Oh, it's a different fire?
He turns left as opposed to going straight ahead.
Ah, okay.
But what's interesting about it is that, if this is sort of the a new era, right? That's supposed to begin the beginning of Tywin's brand new dynasty. He's starting it with an act of theft, with an act of appropriation, which is kind of interesting for a house that, at least on the outside, is supposed to be all about doing things, the right way, or in a grand fashion. And there's something kind of petty and mean about this. And so it kind of makes sense that everything starts to go to crap almost immediately, where Tywin makes his kind of unspoken quid pro quo to Jaime. And there is a sort of a failed attempt at some sort of something modus vivendi that Tywin is, in his mind, trying to build a bridge to Jaime's way of thinking and get him to fill the role that Tywin needs in the Lannister dynasty. That someone needs to carry on the next generation of the Lannisters of Casterly Rock while he led up things at King's Landing. And Jaime is ultimately taking a stand. He doesn't yet know why, which I kind of liked, but is making a stand on an individual basis, and saying, even though he says he kind of likes to say that he has no honor, or that his honor is beyond saving, he's saying, at a certain level, the commitments I have made cannot be overthrown for the family.
Yeah, and what's interesting, especially about how Jamie's behaving, is that on the one hand, there's a bit of false humility where he's saying, I can't be the leader of Castle Rock because he's sort of fishing for a compliment. But on the other hand, as we see with the conversation later with Brienne, that there is a real sense in which he is no longer his father's son,
right?
And he's trying, and I think he's successful in communicating that. That Dad, I'm just not. And it's not just the hand, which is what his father keeps on. And of course, there's all the irony with the fact that he's the hand, he lost the hand, you want to be the hand.
Yeah, exactly.
Hand, but Jamie is as much as I think it's possible for him at this point in his life. He's trying to tell his father, no, this is not something that is.
Well, and he doesn't just sort of try; he outright says no, and Tywin, in absolute sort of classical Tywin fashion, says, I wasn't giving you a choice, and Jaime says, well, I'm telling you no anyway. And it's a very interesting contrast to the last time we saw them together, where previously Jaime really was a kind of a cowed child in front of his father. That all of that snark was sort of effortlessly peeled away, even as his father was peeling away the skin of the deer. And here, he has matured. In a way, he is he's seen through that kind of trick that Tywin plays, the way that he's able to intimidate everyone by making it seem like refusal is not a possibility. And
one of I think the important things, kind of visually about this, if we're going to talk about this as an echo of that scene when he's skinning the Baratheon stag, is that. I mean, Tywin's actually skinning the Baratheon stag in front of, or the metaphorical, figurative Baratheon stag. He's skinning it in front of Jaime, and Jaime is somewhat still. He's a little squeamish. He doesn't like having this conversation. Whereas this time, he's just sitting down in a chair. The angles are actually very, very similar in terms of how Jaime is probably a good 15 feet away from his dad. While they're having this conversation, it looks a little closer when you're seeing it on screen. But in real terms, these two actors are quite far apart. The lens is just racked, and there is this sort of distance between them that it's more than just emotional, physical. It's actually captured there on film. There's something awkward about the way these two are relating, and this is an important difference because of things that will happen later in the season involving statements about whether or not Tywin has ever himself lifted a sword, or if he's what actually makes him intimidating.
Yeah, what makes Tywin
intimidating versus what made Jaime intimidating, which was simply his right hand. Which
and that's why when Tywin is dismissing him, not just from the room, but from the family. He says, a swordsman with no sword hand needs all the help he can get. So, that's very much there. So, the next scene is kind of an interesting setup. Tyrion outside the gates of King's Landing, waiting for someone who's not coming. And what I like is that they very much set up, this is something that the fandom has been talking about and debating about for almost a year now, is how you're going to set up the Dornish as a different presence within this world. That they are othered within this world. And they start with kind of a really interesting way, Bronn starting to tell a racist joke. Which kind of almost subliminally sets up there is a clash of cultures here. This is someone from the outside coming into King's Landing who is going to somehow cause tension, or it's going to be the source of tension. And, Tyrion sort of alludes to this bad blood. And, if you've been following the series since season 1, and you have a very good memory, you might remember where this bad blood is coming from. And then we get a little bit of pure book fan service. The scene where Podrick Payne is identifying the banners. Um, and, you know, I just think it's kind of hilarious that they kept in House Manwoody of Kingsgrave. You know, prominent members of whom being Dickon, Moore, and Miles Manwoody. Just to show you that however much, you know, people might say that this is, you know, a dark and adult series, it's still got time to crack some jokes.
Juvenile humor.
Yeah.
And in fact, I was watching an interview with the actor who plays Hodor, who said that when they asked him what would be different about this season, his answer was penises. That there would be more penises this season than in any season previous. And they asked him if that had
good. They've been lobbying. There's been a lot of lobbying on that front to equalize the male-female nudity gap.
And it was a great moment for him too, because they asked him if this had anything to do with him having come out, the actor having come out over the hiatus. And they were like, "Do you have any comment about your, you know, coming out as gay?" And his response was not no comment. It was Hodor. They were like, "Do you have anything to say?" Hodor. And then he just sort of walked away. And I just it was a lovely little moment. But he sort of emphasized that there is going to be in a sort of more serious vein more of an emphasis on, I don't want to say the you know, like equal distribution of genitalia or anything quite like that, but a more in-depth exploration of the kind of implicit bisexuality that we've had throughout the series, and we get that in a scene that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, and not just implicit but explicit.
Yeah.
Bisexuality as we meet Oberyn Martell in Littlefinger's brothel, and it's kind of, I think it's a really good setup scene in that, you know, you can think of kind of a lot of Oberyn's character is this interesting mix between sensuality and violence, and a little bit the suggestion that there's some sort of, you know, Eros and Thanatos kind of thing going on. And, you know, it very much is kind of showing us a different model of sexuality, that he and his mistress, and he's not just a mistress, but a paramour, which means something different in Dorne than it does somewhere else, and the fact that she's a bastard and shows no shame about it whatsoever. I mean, very different from Jon Snow, for example. But also, they're kind of reacting to these women and men as kind of curiosities, that, you know, oh, they're so pale. Well, that's because here being pale means that you don't work in the fields and you're higher class, whereas in Dorne, being pale means that you're of more Andal descent than Roynish. You know, and
well, it's a sort of classic class versus race.
Yes.
You know, what is the marker of what?
Yeah, and then, you know, they kind of very naturally and smoothly sort of demonstrate, you know, Ilaria is into women and Oberyn is into men in kind of a very class-based way. You know, he's almost sort of saying he's going to be the sort of the top or the dominant because he's a prince, and that's what being a prince means, which is kind of interesting. And somewhat different from kind of, you could say, the Renly model of sexuality. And then you kind of get this.
That Renly was a bottom? I might have.
Well, I mean, certainly he seemed to be the more passive partner, at least when we're introduced to his sexuality.
Okay.
And, you know, then we get this interesting thing where the Rains of Castamere are clearly a trigger for Oberyn Martell, and, you know, just instant. And Ilaria reacts to it with kind of alarm, but an alarm born of experience. Like, she knows this is going to set him off, and she knows where this is headed, and she's trying to kind of head it off at the pass, and it's not working.
But this is, in terms of how this is affecting the audience, I think it's important to note real quickly that the audience is primed when it hears that song
to
want death. I mean, we have been taught that when we hear that song, something terrible will happen to someone we love. And so,
Yeah.
even though we don't consciously really sympathize with any of these characters yet, we hear that song, and right then and there, we want those dickheads dead.
Yeah.
We know
And
they're
then-
dickheads.
And then we get this kind of sequence which sort of establishes Oberyn Martell as a kind of a sympathetic badass figure, where he struts down that hallway and just very casually moves his hand through the fire.
That was a nice little touch.
That was a great little touch, and it's something that Oberyn very much would do. And then he gets into this exchange with the Lannisters, which again is grounded in the bad blood between the families and the racial differences. And it's kind of an interesting use of violence in that he doesn't kill people, right? You're expecting somebody to die, in this very tense kind of standoff, but instead he inflicts pain, and you can see him enjoying it. But at the same time, you're kind of enjoying it because these are two bad people who are being, hurt.
Singing the wrong song,
Well, but, also being racist. So.
But at the same time, his enjoyment of the pain he's inflicting also does bring us back to flaying places, we shall call them.
That's for next episode.
Yeah, well, but it also goes back to previous episodes. I mean, we've already seen what's happened with Reek, and we know we're not supposed to enjoy it. And this is one of those sort of moments where people talk about whether or not the show's guilty pleasure. Like, are we enjoying the violence? In this case, I think we actually are. And also the weird message, always bring a knife to a gunfight. I mean, which is essentially what he says, right? Never bring a big weapon when a small one will do.
Well, that's not exactly what he's saying. What he's saying is Lannisters, and by extension, kind of what we've come to expect from this show, is that the big threat, the big power, the big mode of attack is what they go for, is what we go for.
Oh, you come at us? We got wildfire. I mean,
exactly. Yeah. And he's showing that the faster, the unseen, the subtle is as powerful in certain situations. It's less that you always do one with the other. It's more that at certain distances, there is this kind of subversive power. And then Tyrion enters at the most awkward moment. I do have to give credit to whatever practical effects tech handled the blood spurt as he pulls the knife out, because that looks like a fountain.
Well, I guess we should acknowledge that we're not exactly sure what that blood spurt looks like in the episode that aired, because I don't think it's going to be that big.
They may have scaled it back.
Yeah, I think so. I haven't. Well,
we'll have to see when it airs.
We've seen a version that the effects are incomplete and noted as such. So we should.
Honestly, it was hard to tell.
Well, it said VX incomplete on the bottom left-hand corner. I thought.
I know, but for example, later in this episode, I was really quite shocked. In fact, the very next scene, I was really quite shocked about, this is what dragons look when they're incomplete?
Well, I mean...
It's pretty damn good.
I mean, granted, it was just like three guys waving brooms around with the sign on them that said dragon. It was... I think it was a little wanting. Okay, we saw dragons. But...
Yeah.
But, no, these were incomplete dragons.
But they looked pretty damn good. That's what I'm saying.
They did. But
so
it was a spurt of blood when he did, and
yeah. So to get back to Tyrion for a second, I think what's interesting is we get straight to his motives, and sort of foregrounded by a conversation that's all about honesty. Let's just get the bullshit out of the way and state what our motivations are here. And again, it's tying it to weddings. what's interesting is it's slightly different from the book, in that what you learn in the book that you didn't in the show at this point is that there was this entire other destiny that could have, the path that things could have gone, because Jaime's mother, Jaime, Cersei, and Tyrion's mother used to be friends with the mother, close friends, with the mother of Oberyn and Elia, and that the two mothers had planned for a union of the Lannisters and the Martells, and that because of the death of Tyrion's mother, that plan totally fell apart. So what's kind of interesting about the difference is that it creates a very different context for Oberyn and Tyrion's relationship. That, in the book, Oberyn met Tyrion literally like weeks after Tyrion was born. And so there's a strange kind of parallel between the death of Elia Martell and the death of Joanna Lannister that doesn't exist in the show.
I agree, and also I think another thing about their relationship on the show is, and I don't exactly remember if this is quite as clear in the book, is their bond for being the wrong child. I didn't reread the chapter before watching, but
Oberyn has this quote where he says, he actually says the gods were kind to make him the second son. That if he had been the oldest, or rather the second child, because in Dorne it's all about descent, not gender. If he had been the oldest child, then Dorne would have been destroyed more. But that Doran, being the more subtle and clever and diplomatic one, has kind of given him free rein to be himself and has kept Dorne safe. So it's
there's sort
different.
of a reverse of the Lannisters, where
exactly
Tyrion is clever and Jaime isn't, but it's weird that, given the relationship that we haven't really kind of seen yet between Tyrion and Jaime, the bond that they sort of make as they walk out of Littlefinger's whorehouse is almost a sort of recapitulation of the bond that Tyrion always wanted with his brother, who exists structurally in a very similar relationship to, or I guess in an obverse relationship. You see what I'm saying, though, right?
Yeah, kind of.
It's they're. I guess another way to put it is they're very fast friends. Like,
well, I mean, I'm not so sure about that, because I don't know if you saw this the same way that I did, but the bit where kind of Tyrion is looking down shamefaced, he really doesn't want to literally face up to what his family did, and is kind of denying association. I wasn't born yet, I wasn't here, and Oberyn kind of puts his finger to Tyrion's chin and lifts, sort of forces eye-to-eye contact, and Tyrion kind of smacks his finger away. I saw that as kind of a little bit awkward and uncomfortable, because Oberyn is a stranger laying hands on another stranger, and in a way that is kind of... What?
In either case, right? I mean, it's...
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, when you put your finger on someone's chin to lift their face up, that's kind of an infantilizing thing. That's what you do to a child, because they're smaller than you and need to look up to match you in the eye. And so I saw resentment there on Tyrion's part, that, and more of this kind of ongoing awkwardness where, the first time they meet, he stabbed a Lannister and is making out with his mistress and shows no signs of actually stopping in front of strangers. So, I don't know. Fast friendship, I'm not so sure.
Well, I mean, we could talk about this as the episodes go on. We'll have more opportunities.
Right.
But what I will say is, there was, and sort of getting back to the brotherly thing, there was a sort of intimacy even to putting your hand on a chin, smacking it away. It didn't seem like an aggressive gesture in the way that, could start a war. It seemed like we're now familiar enough with each other for me to tell you to raise your head and look at me. I don't know. There seemed to be an odd note of respect there, but we can table that discussion for a future episode.
Daenerys watching her dragons fighting over a goat, and then Drogon gets territorial at her, which is kind of an interesting moment where all of a sudden...
Drogon, I remember seeing Drogon. There was some guy there, but was that...
Enough with the joke.
Okay.
And
no one's made it yet. Okay, anyway.
And setting up the issue that dragons can't be tamed. And of course, the question is, what is that metaphorical for, right? What can't be tamed? And then we get our reintroduction to Daario Naharis. And I do have to give them credit. The Army of the Unsullied, thanks to some little bit of CGI work to make the army look bigger, actually looks like a proper army this time, and not like a line of 50 dudes in single file to hide their numbers. What do you think of the new Daario?
Well, I mean, they're all new now in Essos. It's they got the new dragons. They replaced Daario. I didn't like him. He reminded me a little too much of Balky from Perfect Strangers to date myself tremendously. He had that goat herder look. Like,
Okay.
I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, oh, here, have a flower. In my country, where I come from, in an episode that was introducing a kind of racialized view of the world that we really haven't seen before, to bring someone in who seemed so much like, Country Mouse, I don't know.
Yeah, I know. I thought it was strange. I mean, a lot of fans of the show didn't like the guy they picked for the first Daario Naharis. And I thought he actually kind of worked.
I agree.
I mean, the character is supposed to be kind of ridiculous. He's supposed to be massively over the top. And so they've kind of dialed him down to be a little bit more realistic. But at the same time, like, he's supposed to represent, like, this kind of cartoonish, piratey, swaggering masculinity, and I'm not seeing it here. I don't know.
I'm not either. I didn't think that worked, but I forgot about it very quickly as they continued walking.
Yeah, I mean, I thought he was engaging enough with Grey Worm. I kind of liked that weird bet thing that they had going on. It was kind of fun.
But he's not a character who should be forgettable, and that's sort of what it seemed like a little to me. And then, of course, we have Slaves on Sticks, and...
No, you mashed two different scenes together.
Oh, okay. Is that the later scene?
Yeah, that's the way later scene.
Okay, so I might have just been so traumatized.
Yeah. Okay, so next is Sansa and Shay.
Ah, okay.
Where Shay is trying to get her to eat, and nothing's working. Not even lemon cakes, which are fantastic.
As we all know, yes.
And my God, she's Sophie, right? Sophie Turner.
Yeah.
Yes. She's doing an amazing acting job in this scene.
Well, I mean, she sort of has to, because we're only getting close-ups of her, essentially. And, it's just...
Well, I mean, it's the way that she's clearly in shock and emotional devastation, but at the same time is sort of subtly kind of not taking Tyrion's shit anymore, and not sort of as much willing to give in to the pretense that she's kind of lived her life under. The bit where she sort of says, I want to go to the Godswood. I don't pray anymore. It's the only place I can go where people won't talk at me. Which I just thought was kind of an amazing little put down.
It is. I sort of wish you had said something other than shit, because a friend of mine who's an actor in the Baton Rouge area where a lot of films are now being made, and actually had a bit part on True Detective, told me that one of the things that they always suspected Matthew McConaughey did was actually, before filming the scenes in True Detective where he's being interrogated, he would take a laxative. So when he was sitting there, that sort of urgency, that kind of manic energy, I'm holding it all.
I did not need to know this.
It's literally him holding on. So when he said that she's holding her shit together, my mind just jumped right to, because that's exactly how.
I said not taking his shit.
I know you didn't mean it literally, but it's sort of interesting because I do think that's it's an operative metaphor for what's going on with her in this moment, which is she is barely keeping it in, like she's
okay.
And you look at who she
got weird fast.
But what's weird is that you brought that word up in conjunction with the exact same scene that my friend mentioned.
Okay.
But it's actually, it's a way of saying it's a great acting job, but it's also a great job of just someone communicating that they're in distress and then running away very, very quickly in a way that is, okay, I know, and I've now ruined this scene for everyone. But I mean, you see my point. Like, she's in distress, and she has to get to Godswood really quickly.
Okay, so we move from there to...
This wasn't the part you're supposed to shut me up about, but okay.
Well, we got a lot of scenes to get through. I'm just looking at my list here. A really kind of interesting scene with Tyrion and Shay, which I hesitate to call it either a fake out or a setup, but it definitely sets up this kind of theme of jealousy, and again, sexual frustration. That Tyrion and Shay are not having sex. Oh, there's your cat. And I guess I had a question for you, which is, what do you think Tyrion's motives are for this? Like, why is he not sleeping with Shay?
I think this goes back to his earlier conversation. The guilt that he feels. I honestly believe we're starting to see a little earlier than we do in the books the sort of shift in Tyrion towards repentance. And I mean, if you've read the books, you know that other characters in the Lannister family will engage in this in a much more public and aggressive fashion. But Tyrion's humbling, or self-humbling, I guess we could call it. I think it's part of it. I honestly do believe he's trying, at this point, to become a better person. Because of, and we get this, I think it's in this episode where he's talking about where Sansa can go, and when he's talking about his relationship with her mother, and that's his episode.
He's trying to make her feel better.
But I actually think he believes it. I think he's stopped dissembling and is starting to use as a tactic, brutal honesty. Just, I'm going to start telling everyone what I actually believe, what I actually feel, and because everything else he's been doing hasn't really worked. I mean, he got promoted, he got demoted, he got locked in a cupboard, and essentially, and I think I don't think he sees it necessarily as another tactic, but it is. It's what's going to serve him going forward. The fact that he's no longer going to be, at least publicly, a dissembler. He might be doing things that are not honest.
Right.
But I don't think he wants to be like himself anymore.
Okay, I get that. I mean, I guess the strange thing there is that kind of symbolically, I guess, places Shay as something that he's repenting for.
Yes.
which I find. I mean, that's a little bit strange because I thought they went to a really sort of impressive extent to say there's some actual love here. There's not just there's not just sex for pay. So it
And
seems
that's why he
strange.
wants her to leave, because he knows his place at this point, and he knows what he's going to have to do to operate in this theater
Yeah.
forward. And
So okay, so speaking of kind of sexual frustration, we move into the scene with Jamie, Cersei, and Qyburn, in which Jamie's been given a hand. Thank you. Yes, clapping all around. And there's kind of an interesting divergence from the book here, which is Cersei has made the hand for him here. She is attempting to sort of cover over the reality of his stump with this golden hand, whereas in the books, Tywin makes this for him, and it's presented almost with the sword as like the way that Tywin deals with his children is through money, and it's very much about like Tywin being ashamed about Jamie losing a hand and kind of trying to make up for it in the most ostentatious way possible. I mean, the damn thing is heavy and useless, and what would be much more effective is, some, wooden or metal, contraption that actually has joints and can be closed and held closed. But instead, he's got this giant gold monstrosity.
I was actually thinking they ought to just attach a shield to it, like a slip-on shield.
Well, I mean,
that way he could just have a.
Okay,
I mean,
this is something.
Yeah,
but this is something that I'll get into more when I get to this part in the books on my blog, which is there is a history of medieval prosthetics, and there is a famous German knight who lost a hand in battle and built a functional prosthetic. It required sort of these leather straps to kind of like act as tendons. They went down this way, but it actually could be sort of held closed or opened, or you sort of move the fingers and then close the hand, so it could actually do things. Whereas the thing that Jamie has is, he can wave with it, which I thought was a great little joke, but he can't really do much with it. And the fact that Cersei has gotten it for him is interesting because there's always been this thing between the two of them that not only are they brother and sister, but they're twins. So they're kind of a reflection of each other. And part of the thing about Jamie losing a hand is that he no longer resembles her. And you can also see that with the haircut. He no longer has these flowing locks anymore. He doesn't look as much like Cersei. So that's kind of an interesting change.
I mean, my feelings about the scenes with Cersei were more about kind of, one, the infantilization that she seems to want to perform on him, but also just her ingratitude, generally speaking, because especially she's accusing him of being ungrateful when she's accusing him of doing things he had no control over.
Well, I mean, what it seems to be is that she's emotionally punishing him for an abandonment he really had little choice over.
And it's one of the moments where she's least sympathetic, and she's a character that I actually want to be sympathetic towards, because I think she's one of the most put upon, if not the most put upon character in the series after Arya. But she doesn't come across very well here. She's just angry and lashing out.
Yeah, well, but I think that's important because these are symptoms, as it were. You notice that she's drinking more. She's refilling her glass more.
No, he notices too. Yeah.
Yes, he notices too. And she's also consulting with Qyburn over, quote, the other matter. Now, what do you think that is? I'm curious.
I don't know. I mean,
because
I have my suggesting, but this all goes to something that's going to happen that we shouldn't talk about yet.
Well, it's either delirium tremens.
Yeah.
It could be that the wine is really starting to get to her. She needs something to counteract that. Or it could be that she's gotten pregnant and had to deal with that. Because she was sleeping with Lancel not too long ago.
That's true. I have my own theories as to what that is, but why don't we table those for?
Okay, it's an interesting thing to think about, and I also like the kind of insinuating way that Qyburn is starting to kind of establish himself within the Lannister circles.
As a healer, when all he's doing is actually tying a hand on.
Yeah. And then we sort of switch to Ygritte, and kind of her and Tormund dealing with the fallout. And did she actually want to kill Jon Snow or leave him alive, and that whole emotional thing. And then we meet our new bad guys, the Thenns. Lovely little makeup job. They look absolutely terrifying. And what I thought was funny about this scene was it really reminded me, for people who've read the books, George R.R. Martin loves writing about food. He will go for pages describing giant, wonderful-sounding meals. And here we get the closest thing to that kind of talk that we've had on the show, where someone is just describing food, and it's a cannibal. I just thought that was fucking hilarious.
It's an arm. Yeah, I actually didn't think that scene worked very well. That's just me.
It was a little bit over the top. I'll say that.
It seemed like they could have put it off for an episode and not really lost anything, because it was just sort of, let's catch up. Meanwhile.
Well, yeah, but I think that for one thing, they have to either be introduced in this episode or next episode, right? We have a whole.
Put that and Snow in the next episode.
Okay, interesting.
Because they just sort of, they didn't entirely work for me.
They work for me more, and I understand why they didn't want them in next episode, because I think they were saving time for a certain event. They wanted one scene to be very long, so obviously more things have to be squashed into another episode.
And I guess a good way to put it is, I think this scene felt very squashed. It felt like a lot of cliches about big bad others coming in and being all crazy with their...
yeah, but, at a certain level, that's a certain amount of that is going to have to happen.
Yeah.
And I actually thought this next Jon scene worked rather well.
Oh, no, I thought it worked well. I was talking about its placement. I loved the scene with Jon. That was...
Okay. So let's talk about it.
All right.
First of all, I really liked Jon's monologue reacting to Rob's death, and Sam's kind of part in that, where he's kind of once again having this function of recapitulating family relationships within the context of the Night's Watch. That symbolically and literally, he's sort of saying it's absolutely horrible what's happened to your family, but again, you have a family here. And then sort
Let's
of...
go meet Dad.
Yeah, well, stepdad. Angry stepdad is here. And they kind of immediately kind of lead into the question, is Jon welcome in the Night's Watch? And I love that they just have Janos Slynt be there. They don't make a thing of it. He's just there, and he's being a massive asshole. And Jon is being really sassy back at him. And I loved it. I haven't always been the biggest fan of Kit Harington as Jon Snow, but I was really enjoying him in this scene. I was really feeling more of the Jon Snow here.
It very much reminded me of scenes from something like MI5, or where the undercover agent had to go before a panel and explain why he had been fucking the Russian spy for 8 months, and it was because I'm more committed to the job than
Yeah,
you.
it is the maverick cop being called into the
Well, not the
chief's
maverick.
office.
It's the one who's actually the better cop.
Yeah, but
And
the maverick is usually the better cop, right? I mean, that's the way the genre works. You know, he gets things done.
yeah,
Exactly. And I thought they actually played it. Okay. I thought they actually played it rather well, where Jon Snow, for once, and in a episode that is very much about everyone sort of, for once, actually telling the truth. Sort of lays it all out there. It says, I broke all my vows, I killed Corn Halfhand, I slept with a woman, but the flip side is, I know how many of them there are, I know when they're going to attack, I know from what directions they're going to attack, what are we going to do about this? And I also thought, I don't know the actor's name, but the guy who's playing Master Aemon,
yeah.
I thought he was great. He gets that line about, if we cut the head off every ranger who ever slept with a girl, then there'd only be headless men guarding the wall. And then the later bit about, how do you know that how did you get this miraculous talent that you always know when someone's telling the truth? I grew up
in King's Landing, yeah.
Which I thought was wonderful.
It's the oldest man to ever drop the mic, I think. He just sort of...
as he sort of wanders off frame.
Off stage, too. I mean,
yeah, exactly. And then we get this kind of interesting little scene with Marjorie, Olenna, and Brienne. Where, they're setting up, okay, on the one hand, Olenna is being the funny, irascible old woman, and they're setting up the wedding, and clearly they're not too thrilled about Joffrey, specifically. And then Brienne shows up, and they're really nice to her. And I don't know why, but I was very happy that they were.
I think it's this aura of earnesty. I mean, and I think it's the same thing that's infecting Jaime. Like, she has this, it's contagious. She is just so earnest that people, they see her. And I mean, the first thing she says is like, oh my God, they told me about you, but I didn't believe it could be, like, you're giant and homely and plain.
Well, but the phrase that she uses, she doesn't say you're homely and plain. She says you're amazingly singular.
Yeah.
Which is such a kind of from someone who normally makes a weapon out of discourtesy. It's amazingly courteous.
And that's what I'm saying. She has if she were a mutant, her power would be the power to make everyone around her be totally sincere.
Yeah, and she tells Melisandre about the Stannis in the Shadow, which is kind of interesting. I wasn't. I figured out. What?
You said Melisandre, not Melisandre, but.
Oh, sorry. She tells Marjorie.
Marjorie.
I just have M in my notes.
It'd be much different if she told Melisandre.
Yes, yes, I know. So she tells Marjorie about the Shadow and Stannis. And that's kind of an interesting little moment. I have no idea where they're going with that. And then when we get to see, I think, my favorite prop from this episode, which is truly the ugliest statue I've ever seen.
Oh. And I will be talking about this statue in my article for TV Club. But it's a wonderful statue.
Yeah.
And I think I know what it's based on, actually.
Okay.
There is a statue of.
Do you want me to stop you here?
No. This I can go with.
Okay.
There is a statue of Jefferson Davis in Arlington.
You're shitting me, really?
And I'll have visuals for this with the Onion article, but it's exactly the same pose that Joffrey strikes in the statue, and then when they cut to him actually standing there with Jaime, like, it's the same pose, and it's the same angle when you walk up the hill in Virginia to look at the statue of the former president of the Confederacy. It's
the what now?
The former, yes. I think that might be significant.
A legal position that does not exist.
Well, but that he thought did, and he thought he was the rightful. But I mean, it's
Okay, all right, we're getting there.
yeah. I mean, the South, of course, will rise again. But no, I mean, you see what I'm saying? It's
Yeah.
it's a statue of an illegitimate usurper.
And then we kind of fade into Joffrey doing the exact same pose, and it's hilarious.
As
and
if
he's
it's a
just
flashback
acting
to the moment
exactly.
when it was created.
Yeah,
but no,
and
he just stands like that, which gives us the impression that he sees the statue, likes it, and decides, I'm going to stand like that a lot now.
Yeah, it's clearly like, there's 99 things out of 100 that you can't do as king. But clearly, the one thing he has mastered is, like, stand dramatically.
Well, it's douchebag imitating art, is what
exactly.
it is. And
that's great. I love that douchebag imitating art.
I mean, that's
and he's acting. He is acting an amazing prick in this scene with Jaime, where he's just taking credit for everything, and he's sniveling and obnoxious.
Abusive to his father. I mean, yeah.
His funkle.
His uncle, sorry.
No. His funkle.
Funkle. Oh, okay. I haven't heard that. Funkle.
But we also get the book. And this is kind of an important part in the in Jaime's story. I don't know if we're going to come back to it. I'm hoping that this was kind of a setup. Like, pay attention, this book is important.
Also, it's half written. I mean, you put a blank page of a filled book on a television screen, people would expect it to be filled up.
Yeah. And we get two mentions that are kind of huge for book fans. Sir Arthur Dane, the Sword of the Morning, which had not been mentioned before, many of us thought would never be. And Sir Duncan the Tall, which, if you're fans of certain novellas, is kind of a spoiler. But not for TV show watchers. Oops. Hold on, technical difficulties.
Please stand by.
Okay, done.
Thank you for flying with... Oh, okay, go on.
So now we get the scene with Dario and the roses, which I was not super keen with. And then we get the message. And I thought the message looked really quite good. I was a little bit surprised that they didn't kind of do the full Spartacus thing and have them kind of a line of them. But it was sufficiently creepy.
Actually, I'm going to disagree. I like the fact that they didn't have the line of them, because in the sort of classic horror tradition of what you don't know is creepier than what you can see. Having the one and then just having us imagine at every mile marker for whatever 163 miles they said, we're now imagining, and we've all been on road trips, and I mean, especially if you've been on road trips in the South, you know those mile markers, and you look for them because it's the only way you can stay awake when you're, driving between Eunice and Abita Springs, fucking Louisiana, for me at least. It's just those things keep you up and prevent like highway hypnosis. So the idea that this is what you have to look forward to as you're getting more and more tired. This horrible sign.
Yeah, but it's interesting.
I like that better than the row of, in part also because it's been done. I mean, most people I think who are watching Game of Thrones have probably seen Spartacus.
Yeah. I mean, what I like about the scene is I thought that Dany making the choice that she's going to look in the faces of all of these dead slave children, and then saying, take the collar off before you bury her, I thought was, a nice symbolic statement. And kind of sets up... Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Which is part of my kind of issue with the people who can only see this particular plot line as having to do with Iraq and can't see that it also has to do with the Civil War. And then we get this really interesting kind of geographic scene with Sansa, Jaime, Brienne, and then Sir Dantos, in that they're all kind of in the same place, almost arranged vertically. And sort of Jaime and Brienne are kind of commenting on Sansa, as she's kind of aware that she's being watched, but not that she's being watched by someone below her. I thought was kind of interesting.
I mean, there's and in fact we get. I couldn't quite geographically place it all because I think later in the episode, or maybe in the next or episode or two, Jaime and Bronn are going to be.
That's a different part of the same.
Oh, that's a different. I thought that was sort of part of the tiered.
Yeah, but that's because the Red Keep is on a hill, so it's just two different sides of the hill.
Oh, it's on the other side. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I really like those scenes. One, because Sansa needs to acquire some gravitas quickly, given what we know is going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But honestly, I much preferred the scene between Brienne and Jaime.
Well, I mean, I just thought she's an important sort of. She takes on symbolic importance that she is the object of this promise. That Arya is missing, nobody knows where she is, but Sansa is here, you've made a promise, and Brienne kind of, again, won't let him get away with anything. Really pushes him to sort of say, no, you made a promise, you have to deal with this. And then we get the bit with Ser Dantos. I didn't quite like the, chase sequence thing. I mean, maybe it works better for someone who doesn't know the books.
Yeah.
Because I was like, I know exactly what's about to happen. And it's a fake out. Surprise, surprise. But I thought the Ser Dantos thing, worked. I was a little disappointed that he didn't sort of mention... First of all, I mean, necklace versus a hairnet. I don't know why they picked one or the other. They seems like Samet Egal.
Dear women viewers, please tell us why that might be significant. Go on.
Okay. And then the fact that he doesn't say it's magic. But at the same time, it was a nice scene. It was a scene I didn't think was happening because they cut out Ser Dantos' scenes from Season 2 because they didn't like how they went, I guess.
I do like how they reminded us who he was.
Yeah. No,
Literally.
but it was a good reminder. It was, that Sansa is someone who does good things for people.
Yeah.
And then we get the adventures of Arya and the Hound, the best odd couple since. Please
make a spin-off, please, George R. R. Martin, if you're listening.
Yeah, I mean, very much Lone Wolf and Cub.
That's exactly what. Oh, that's exactly what it fucking is.
If Cub was a little bit more homicidal.
Yeah. No, but that is exactly.
Yeah, and it nicely sets up some things. They still don't really get along that well, but they kind of had this odd couple thing going on. That sort of she insults him, he insults her back. He mentions that he's taking her to her aunt in the Vale. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna say it's a moment where a lot of times my main complaint about the show would be that the dialogue is actually a little crisper in the books. I think Martin is actually very good at getting individual voices in the books, and oftentimes the dialogue on the show doesn't quite live up to it. But here, they just started channeling David Milch, and we're going full Deadwood.
Yeah.
In this scene, and when I was watching it with my roommates and everyone, all of whom are big Deadwood fans, when the Hound is bargaining, and just
Wait, before we get there.
Okay.
I did love the bit where we see Paulover. We're reminded, Arya just tells us and the Hound at the same time, who is this guy? Why should we care? There's the sword. Pay attention to the sword. The sword is there. And we get that great line of, he killed Lamy. What the fuck is a Lamy? And I just cracked up at that point.
And there's also a beautiful, old school, Marx Brothers cutaway.
Oh, yeah.
She's suddenly gone, and they cut to, an empty bush, and then they cut back to him going, what? Which is a weird, look for him to have on his face.
Yeah, it is kind of, there is a sort of a strange air of, dark, dark, dark comedy going on here. And sort of Arya is charging in, and he grabs her by the shoulder, but then the door opens, and then they have to go in. Everything's awkward, and then we sort of are introduced to this truly ugly scene of essentially rape and banditry under legal cover.
Yeah.
And that this ultimately is what Joffrey becomes. And then there's the great bargaining bit about, the drinking and the chicken and, like, how much abuse can the Hound inflict on this guy.
And then we go full Deadwood.
And it truly is, like, it is sort of like a Western tavern brawl with swords. Especially the bit where he gets knocked down and starts getting kicked in the ribs by the two guys. And Arya now is taking more steps into the realm of the homicidal. First kill some guy to grab his sword, and then maims Polliver in order to set up a scenario in which he is going to say the words that Lami said, and she is going to symbolically say his words and stab him with Needle. And she has regained Needle, she's gained her sword back, she's gained a horse, and the fascinating thing about this scene to me is, you may have heard George R. R. Martin just released a chapter in the 6th book of the series that includes this exact event. And I have to think... It's a
weird coincidence.
I have to think that he basically said, fuck it, they're not getting their version of this out before I am. Let me show you who can do this better.
I don't think so. I think he probably saw the dailies from the Hound's delivery in this, because it's one of the few moments where really, and I'm not saying this just because they use the word cunt, which is a terrible word that we should not use unless we use it properly. And by properly, I mean in the most awful way possible. Like, there's only and so when I say full Deadwood, I'm going back to the episode of Deadwood where Wild Bill Hickok tells the man who will kill him,
yeah,
right, you will shut your cunt mouth, and we got a direct echo of that.
Yeah.
And also, I'm gonna have to kill all these chickens. I mean, there was, a little bit of the Jon Stewart keep fucking that chicken thing going on there as well. But I mean, it was a moment where the dialogue actually rose to the level of the drama that was being depicted. And this series has actually it's relied more on the drama than the dialogue. And
I don't know if I'd go that far. I mean, certainly
the big moments have always been dramatic. They've always been
but at the same time they've used the dialogues from the books effectively. Even in some cases they've inserted lines that profoundly change your memory and understanding of the series. And I'll just give you an example, because this recently happened for me. Okay. What is Serial Pharrell's tagline?
Oh, but damn it! I feel like I'm doing my qualifying exams. Because I'm gonna get it wrong. I'm not gonna get it exactly right. He does the police in different voices. No, wait, that's T.S. Eliot. History is a nightmare from which I cannot. No, wait, fuck, that's James Joyce. Okay.
What do we say to the god of death? Not today, right?
Not today, yeah.
Okay, not in the books.
I know.
And like when I was writing about the chapter in book 1 that deals with that scene in the show, I forgot that he didn't say that in the books. And when you're dealing with the central question of is Serial Pharrell dead, that line takes on a huge importance. And I legitimately forgot it wasn't in the book. So I would say, well, it is true, a lot of the power of the show is their ability to use the visual medium to create drama. Give them a little bit of credit for the wordsmithing that can even throw someone who's read the books 5 times.
Uncle.
Okay.
Uncle.
All right.
By the way, since you're talking about, and we're at the end of the episode, but before we finish up the podcast, since you're talking about this writing that you've done about the book, there might be something you want to plug at this point.
Yes, I thought I'd set it up wonderfully. So, by the time that you are watching and or listening to this, I will have published a book, which is called Race for the Iron Throne, History and Politics of a Game of Thrones, which is a collection of 73 essays I wrote, one on each chapter of the first book, that details the history, the politics, hypothetical scenarios, and the differences between the book and the show for every single chapter of the first book. It is the first volume in an ongoing series. It is available on Amazon Kindle's Marketplace. If you enjoy this podcast, if you enjoy the links that are in this podcast, please buy my book and help me actually do this for a semi-living.
And there will be a link to the book at lawyersgunsandmoney.com, lawyersgunsandmoneyblog.com, where you've found this podcast. And I guess we're about done with this episode. Thank you for listening. This has been another edition.
Next time for a royal wedding.
All right, we will see you next time. This has been another edition of the Lawyers, Guns, and Money podcast with Scott Kaufman and Steve Adderall. All right, we'll talk to you later.